Greetings! In this video we will create our UV map. Before we begin, I need to make a correction. I inadvertently pulled the eye cavity over the center line, and then when I bisected it, it cut here and create this hole. So I'm going to get it back to where it was. I'm using target weld, and I just want to eliminate the new faces that were created by that bisection. And I'll grab these two edges and bridge that back, and that's where it was. But it was over the center line. It was over that center line. And so I am going to tap the B key and just really slide that in. We can verify in the top view it's not over the center line. So that was a mistake I made when I extruded that back. So we'll correct that. And then I forgot to create the ear canal. So I'm going to grab this face, tap the B key, turn that off. We'll extrude it and just pull that straight back in world space. Take a look at it here. We'll pull that forward and maybe down a little bit. We've got faces penetrating, so I'm going to grab this edge and we'll just pull it down and over. And now I can see to be able to pull that vertex. And it looks like I've got a little bit of penetration that way, so we'll pull that in. And I just want to make sure none of those faces are sitting in the same place. And so we've got a pretty clean ear canal there, and we'll mirror this and then we'll start. So in the modeling, come to mesh, mirror, and I'll put my merge threshold to 0.1, and you certainly want to increment and save, especially if you made that same, if you followed me into the mistake that I made. Make that correction, give yourself the ear canal, and now we're ready to proceed with the UV map. We'll open our UV map editor. The icon is here on our polygon shelf, or the long way is UV editor. And when we select our object, we see the UVs, and you can see why we have to generate the UV map. All of those faces, all of those polyplanes that we created came with a UV map, but they're all just sitting in the exact same place. So we'll come to UV planar and we'll open that dialog box. We're just going to project a UV map right in the Z, right? We modeled Z forward. So we'll make sure that Z is the axis, and then we'll also click Keep Image Width and Height Ratio. We can hit Project, and now we've got the recognizable face, but the UVs for the front, back, and side are all sitting in the same place. So if I were to paint, it would just project all the way through, and then, in fact, I wouldn't be able to paint on these on the sides of the head. So we have to lay this out. I'm going to select this as a shell. And down here, let's close these so you can see where they are. We'll come down to unfold, and we also want to have cut and sew open. If I were to hit unfold right now, you see that it used the neck as the starting point for that. So I'm going to hit undo. Let's also make sure that we're using the unfold 3D. So we're going to open the dialog box. Note there's no dialog box here, so we'll come the long way, modify, unfold. We'll open that dialog box and make sure that unfold 3D is the method. If unfold 3D isn't available to you, your plugin didn't load properly, and so we can go and manually do it. We'll come to Windows, Settings, Preferences, Plugin Manager. This is in the event that unfold 3D isn't available to you there. And at the end of this first long list of plugins is unfold 3D. And so make sure that it says load and auto load. And if you're clicking those for the first time, you would need to hit refresh down here. Ours is available, it's selected, and so we're good to go. And I think by default, pack may not be on. And you want pack, and that just means that it'll put it in the one-to-one space. And so again, if we execute that, I need to have the shell selected. If we execute unfold, it uses the neck, and so we want to create our own seam. Standard practice is to cut right at the hairline where the forehead meets the hairline, and then shift double click on the rear. Now our character is not going to have hair, it's going to have a hat, but that still applies here. We're putting the seam in the least conspicuous place, and that would be covered by hair or a hat. If you wanted to have a character without hair or without a hat, you could pick a different seam, a strategically placed seam. But this is pretty standard practice to have that selected there. And we'll come and we'll hit cut, And note, we didn't cut any geometry. That can sometimes be confusing. We're cutting the UV map. So nothing was affected out here on our mesh. Nothing has been detached on the mesh. The UVs have been cut. Now we can grab our shell, and now when we hit unfold with the Unfold 3D plugin, we get a good map. You can see here that there are no overlapping UVs, which means that we can paint cleanly. And we've got a couple of options here. We can paint using Paint Effects right now and paint. And if you're good with Paint Effects, you could paint your entire map here in Maya. Some folks prefer a third-party application. If you're adept at Photoshop, you may want to paint in Photoshop. So let's talk about that. I'm going to grab the UV shell, and we'll come to the little camera here, or the long way is Image UV Snapshot. And you want to select the size. If your processor can handle it, 4096 is a nice high-resolution texture. It will be able to withstand close-ups. Remember that resolution always has to do with the proximity of the camera to the item or to the map. And then you also have to consider your processor power. So this is a pretty large texture. You can make that smaller if you have a less robust processor. And then just in terms of strategy, if this was a character that was going to be in the distance and you were never going to see it very closely, according to your storyboard design, you would want to make that smaller. Here is the path, and then if we want to open it in Photoshop, we would choose JPEG. And then before we hit OK, this has to be selected as an object. So it will not export if it's selected in component mode. And when you're UV mapping, you're typically in component mode. And so that can be a little bit confusing. A student will go and hit OK and get an error. How come it's not exporting? Must be selected as an object. So we'll hit OK. Looks like I already had that map there. We'll hit yes. And so now that is exported. But our UV map is complete. In the second part of this video, I'll come back and we'll have a refresher on Paint Effects, and then I'll show you how to open this in Photoshop and bring it back to Maya. Okay, be back in a second. Welcome back. We're in Photoshop. We've opened our UV map, the path that you chose from the UV snapshot in Maya. That's where you will find this. And we're going to go through just a standard workflow. The first thing we're going to do is invert this. So Image, Adjust, Invert, or Command-I on the keyboard. We want to be working with a black wireframe on a white background. And we're going to be creating multiple layers. It's a very common mistake to inadvertently paint on your wireframe. Then when we take this back to Maya, you would actually see this. This is just a graphic JPEG. So we'll be careful to never paint on the UV map itself, and in fact to keep it on a separate layer so that we can hide it away. We'll create a new layer, and these are in the wrong order. We always want the background on top, but let me just paint something real quick to demonstrate. I'm on my new layer, and let's get in here a little bit closer. And let's just say I painted this, right? We're painting something around the eye. Now, I want my my background layer to be on top. So I'm going to slide that up. I'll unlock it first and slide that up. With this sitting on top, I can't see what I'm painting. So we'll come to multiply. So my UV map is going to sit on top of all of my other layers. And in order to see through it, our inverted UV map, we'll choose multiply. And then in order to make sure that we don't accidentally paint on it, we'll lock it. So now our UV map is the top layer, multiply is on, and it's locked on multiply. And now we can create as many layers as we want and paint on those layers depending on your workflow and how you manage your layers. Maybe you want every single item to be on a different layer. Maybe your style is just to paint on a single layer. But just make sure that your UV map is sitting on top. And I am not going to do anything fancy here because it takes considerable time, maybe even hours, to create a good UV map. So I'm just going to demonstrate very quickly that we can see where we want our elements to be, and some other things, where our interior mouth cavity is. We would want that to all be black. I'm going to feather my edge. So right, we would paint that black. I'm just going to do that very quickly. Here's a nostril. Here's a nostril. The extrusion into the ear, and you get in there nice and tight and fix that. This is the interior eye. So these are some elements that you would want to paint very dark. Depending on your abilities in Photoshop, if you are a Photoshop intermediate or even just a beginner, but you're willing to spend the time, this is good. The Paint Effects tools are far more robust, or excuse me, the Photoshop tools are more robust than Paint Effects. If you're not good at Photoshop, then I would suggest Paint Effects, and in the next section of the video, I'll talk about some Paint Effects tips. But let's finish this thought. So let's say we're completely done. You can save as a master, so save a Photoshop PSD master, and then you can save this out as a JPEG, or you could load it as a Photoshop document. If you do that, you'd want to make sure that the UV map was off and that you had at least one background. So I'm going to create just a background fill for this. So you could, again, let me just rephrase that or reiterate that. We can save this Photoshop document and we can load the Photoshop document into Maya. If you do not have a robust processor, that will take a lot of RAM if you have a lot of layers. If you're being efficient, you could just flatten this. We could say flatten. And then just make sure that when you save that you're going save as, because you don't want to save over that original UV map. So I'm going to save this just as a JPEG here, and we'll load it into Maya in just a moment. Okay, welcome back. Here we are back in Maya. I'm going to just assign a new material. We'll just assign a brand new Lambert. I'm going to delete all my history. We've done a little bit of modeling there just a moment ago. Come out to Lambert 10, and I'm going to come and find that JPEG that I just saved from Photoshop. We'll turn off the filter type, and I am going to go find it. And I believe I had it here, and it's out UV2 JPEG. I'll hit open, and we'll, a lot of times students say, hey, I can't see it. Remember, we want to have textures on. And there we've got and I've also got wireframe on. You want to verify that that's not part of your texture. And so there's the complete process of exporting it and then bringing it back. Now, do not evaluate me on this particular painting or drawing, but that would be the approach. Now, if we wanted to just do Paint Effects, I'm going to assign a new material, and we'll just, again, choose a Lambert. And just a quick review, you can go back and look at the Skull Sculpt Paint, or just a real quick review, we'd come to Rendering, Texturing, 3D Paint Tool, Dialog Box. We want to, first of all, assign Edit Texture. If you're going big here, we've got 496, and we'll choose JPEG in case we want to open this Paint Effects texture in Photoshop and also work on it. That's an option. So we'll hit Assign, and then I've got Reflection on, and we'll come and grab some brushes up here, our little, I believe that's a butterfly. And if we came down to oils, right, you could begin to paint. Maybe we're giving this clown some white makeup, and you're in business. You can, right, we've got a good UV map. You can begin to paint. You can use any combination of these tools to create your UV map. And that's it. All right, questions in the discussion forum. Have a good one.